Maya Carter, 34, had always believed that family celebrations were measured by the effort behind them, not the number of people sitting at the table. I worked as a project coordinator for a medical nonprofit, and I spent most of my days organizing details other people overlooked. Maybe that was why I noticed what my father, Daniel, had done for my mother's 30th anniversary dinner. For 3 weeks, my father woke up before sunrise and worked quietly in the garage. He restored the old oak dining table that had been in our family for nearly 25 years. He sanded every corner, repaired the scratches, and polished the surface until it looked almost new again. He even placed the small silver serving tray my grandmother had passed down beside the centerpiece because he knew my mother loved the tradition behind it. That tray had always represented something in our family. Whoever sat at the center of the celebration was the person everyone was supposed to honor. My father had written a handwritten note for my mother and placed it under the tray. He had planned everything down to the smallest detail, including her favorite vanilla cake from a bakery she had loved since she was 20 years old. At 8:47 p.m., while I was standing in my apartment hallway holding the gift I had wrapped for my parents, my phone buzzed. The message on the screen changed everything. Dinner is already over. You're late. Cover the bill. There was no explanation. No question. No concern about whether something had happened. Just an expectation. I stared at the words while holding the framed photograph I had chosen for them, a picture of my parents from their wedding day in 1996. Behind me, my own dining table was covered with the things I had prepared to bring, a bottle of wine, the photo, and a small envelope with money toward the celebration. I remember looking down at the gift bag in my hand and then back at the message. My father's 3 weeks of effort had been reduced to a bill I was expected to pay. I didn't know it yet, but that night would end with me standing beside that same silver serving tray, realizing that my family's traditions had never meant what I thought they meant. Here's what my mother didn't understand about that night. The dinner wasn't the betrayal. The dinner was only the moment when years of quiet choices finally became impossible to ignore. For most of my life, my family operated around an invisible ranking system. Nobody announced the rules, but everyone knew them. My mother, Linda, was always the person whose feelings required the most attention. Her birthdays became week-long events. Her opinions became final decisions. Her disappointments became family emergencies. The silver serving tray was the perfect symbol of that system. It was always polished before important occasions. It always carried the best dishes, the best desserts, and the most carefully prepared items. Somehow, it also always ended up closest to my mother. My father was different. Daniel was the person who remembered everyone else's favorite things. He kept old birthday cards in a wooden box. He saved family recipes written on faded paper. He knew exactly how my coffee needed to be made and would quietly prepare it before anyone else woke up. I loved him for that. But for years, I also ignored what was happening. I told myself my mother was just strong-willed. I told myself avoiding arguments kept the family together. I laughed when she interrupted him. I stayed silent when his efforts were overlooked. I wasn't only someone who was hurt by the system. I had helped keep it alive. The strange thing about that night was that I had done everything people usually tell you to do when there is a misunderstanding. I had confirmed the plans. I had asked the questions. I had made sure nobody could later say they forgot. 5 days before the anniversary dinner, I texted my mother asking what time she wanted everyone there. She replied, 6:30 p.m. Don't be late. 3 days before, I mentioned the dinner during a family video call while my brother and aunt were both listening. My mother reminded everyone that it was her and Daniel's 30th anniversary celebration. The day before, I sent another message asking if I should bring anything. She answered, just yourself. Your presence matters. Those words stayed in my mind because they were the exact opposite of what happened. At 8:47 p.m. on the night of the anniversary, I received the message that ended the illusion I had been protecting for years. You're late. Cover the bill. That was all. No explanation. No apology. No, are you okay? Nothing. And underneath those words was my mother's usual sentence, the one she used whenever anyone questioned her behavior. Don't make it a thing. She had said it when my father's birthday was forgotten because she wanted to attend a business dinner. She had said it when my brother canceled plans with Daniel 3 times in 1 month. She had said it whenever someone suggested that maybe she had gone too far. Don't make it a thing. That was how problems disappeared in our family. Not because they were solved. Because everyone was trained to pretend they were too small to matter. I was still standing in my apartment when I received the message. The framed wedding photograph was on the counter beside me. The ribbon on the gift bag was still perfectly tied. I looked around my quiet kitchen, then imagined my father sitting alone after spending weeks preparing for a night that had already ended. I drove to my parents' house anyway. When I arrived, the driveway was almost empty. The lights inside were still on, but the energy was gone. Through the window, I could see the oak table my father had restored. The candles had burned down. The plates had been cleared. The silver serving tray sat in the middle of the table, holding nothing. My mother looked at me from the doorway. She didn't look surprised. She simply said, "The restaurant charged us for everything. Since you missed it, you can handle the cost." That moment was when I realized this was never about dinner. It was about whether I would continue accepting the role I had been given. My father was in the kitchen washing glasses. He didn't yell. He didn't ask why I was late. He didn't blame anyone. He just looked tired. That was somehow worse. I expected anger. I expected sadness. I expected him to finally say everything he had been holding back. Instead, he quietly said he was going to put the decorations away. That silence followed me into the past. I remembered every small moment I had dismissed. The anniversary card my father bought himself because nobody remembered. The family vacation where he spent the entire trip taking pictures but appeared in only one. The countless dinners where my mother chose the restaurant, the schedule, and the conversation topics while everyone else adjusted. I had always told myself these were small things. But small things repeated for years become a pattern. And the hardest truth was this. My mother had created the system, but I had helped protect it. I had mistaken peace for love and silence for loyalty. I wasn't only the person who finally noticed the unfairness. I was someone who had benefited from pretending not to see it. The next morning, I did something I had avoided doing for years. I called people. Not to start a fight. Not to gather supporters. I just wanted to know if I was seeing the situation clearly or if I had somehow become too sensitive after one painful night. The first person I called was my Aunt Rebecca. She had known my family longer than anyone. She had watched my mother's personality develop over decades, and I thought she would understand why my father's silence bothered me more than my mother's words. Instead, after I explained what happened, there was a long pause. Then she said, "Maya, your mother can be difficult, but don't make it a thing." The same sentence. Different person. She told me my mother was probably stressed. She reminded me that anniversaries could bring out emotions. She said I should focus on the fact that everyone was still family. I thanked her for listening, but I already knew what she was really asking me to do. Ignore it. The second person I called was my brother, Ethan. I thought maybe he would understand because he had always been closer to my father. I reminded him how much work Daniel had put into the dinner. Ethan sighed and said, "You know how Mom is. She likes things done a certain way. Maybe just let this one go." This one. That phrase stayed with me. Because it was never just one. It was every forgotten moment, every dismissed feeling, every time someone decided that my mother's comfort was more important than someone else's hurt. I sat in my car after that call and realized I wasn't looking for someone to attack my mother. I was looking for one person to say, that wasn't okay. Eventually, I found that person. My father. When I told him I felt guilty for not speaking up sooner, he didn't blame me. He didn't tell me I should have known better. He simply told me that I was allowed to stop carrying something that was never mine to fix. That was the permission I had been waiting for. Not permission to punish my mother. Permission to stop begging for fairness. A week later, I made one final attempt to repair things. I invited my mother to a smaller dinner at my house. No audience. No expensive restaurant. No pressure. Just a chance to sit together and acknowledge what happened. I told her she could choose the dessert. I told her I would make her favorite meal. I even offered to recreate parts of the anniversary dinner my father had planned. I was giving her a path back. She didn't take it. Instead, She said the problem wasn't what happened. The problem was that I was making her look bad. Then she gave me her conditions. She said if I continued talking about the dinner, people would start choosing sides. She said relatives would see me as someone who attacked my own mother. She said I was risking the family because I couldn't let something go. It was the first time I understood the real argument. She wasn't asking me to forgive her. She was asking me to protect her image. And I finally stopped trying to win a place inside a system that only valued me when I stayed quiet. I decided to build something different. A table where nobody had to earn their seat. I kept my mother's place open because leaving someone behind was never the lesson I wanted to learn. The lesson was that love without respect eventually becomes a performance. And I was done performing. The night I finally announced my decision, I opened my phone and wrote the message I wanted to send first. The first draft was 3 paragraphs long. It listed every birthday, every forgotten promise, every time my father had been treated like he was invisible. I wrote that my mother had spent 30 years demanding attention while ignoring the people who gave it to her. I read it twice. Then I deleted it. The second draft was shorter but colder. I wrote that I was done being her daughter unless she learned how to respect me. My finger hovered over the send button. Then I deleted that too. Neither message was about healing. They were about pain looking for somewhere to go. So I wrote the message I actually sent. I told my mother I loved her, but I would no longer participate in gatherings where people were ranked, embarrassed, or used. I said the door was open if she wanted a relationship built on honesty and respect. Her response came 11 minutes later. Whatever helps you sleep at night. That was it. No argument. No apology. No curiosity. Just a sentence that showed me she still believed this was about winning. A month later, I held the first dinner at my house. It was nothing like my mother's anniversary celebration. The plates didn't match. The chairs came from 3 different rooms. The dessert was slightly overcooked because my father and I were laughing too much while making it. But everyone was there. My father sat at the head of the table, not because he demanded that position, but because everyone wanted to hear his stories. The old oak table he restored became the center of the room. Meanwhile, my mother hosted her own gathering that same weekend. I only heard about it from my Aunt Rebecca afterward. The decorations were beautiful. The food was expensive. The room looked perfect. But there were only 6 people there. Rebecca told me something else too. She said my mother kept looking toward the empty chair beside her. The chair she had expected everyone to fight for. The chair nobody wanted to fight for anymore. The hardest part was admitting that my new life didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a loss too. I lost the idea that my mother would suddenly become the person I had always hoped she would be. I lost years trying to convince myself that patience would eventually be rewarded. My father helped me understand something I had ignored for too long. My mother's need for control came from her own fears. She had grown up believing that being admired was the same as being loved. That explained her behavior. It did not erase the damage. Months later, my mother came to my house without calling first. I saw her standing outside the door holding a small paper bag. I didn't rush to open it. For the first time in my life, I let the moment belong to me. When I finally invited her inside, she tried the old methods. She tried explaining why everyone had misunderstood her. She tried suggesting that we were all overreacting. Neither worked. Then, for the first time, she asked a question that sounded different. She asked if there was still a way to fix what she had broken. I told her there was one condition. Any repair had to begin with my father, not with her need to feel forgiven. What happened next between my mother and father was private. They sat together for a long time, and the conversation was one I chose not to repeat. But I saw my father's expression when they finished. For the first time in years, he looked lighter. A year later, we created a new tradition. Every month, we held an open-table dinner. Nobody sat in the most important seat. Nobody received special treatment. Everyone brought something. My mother came too. One evening, I watched her quietly polish the old silver serving tray before dinner. She didn't place it in front of herself. She placed it in the center of the table. 30 years of marriage, one 8:47 p.m. message, and one forgotten anniversary dinner taught me what my family never understood. A table is not valuable because someone gets served first. It is valuable because nobody is left standing outside it.